Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaign review, this time revisiting the Dwarfs. We're not just going to be focusing on one Legendary Lord in this video here, I'm going to be focusing on 5. So that's all of the Dwarf Legendary Lords with the exception of Malachi McCason, because I think that his original campaign review is still up to date. And that's largely because the other 5 were done before the Dwarf rework, so mainly what I want to be doing in this video here is doing a little bit more in depth than what I did previously, because these were some of the first ones that I did, but also talking about how the Dwarf rework impacts on their campaign, whether I think it's more enjoyable or less enjoyable than it was before. And yeah, we'll start with Thorgrim Grudgebearer, but I really want to touch on the overall Dwarf rework first, because even though I've talked about it plenty in the past, I just want to get that initial context in before we actually start talking about the individual Legendary Lords. So, the Dwarf rework adds the Age of Reckoning system and also reworks the Great Book of Grudges, so it's vastly different than it was before, and also adds in the Deeps, allowing you to basically build an Undercity in any settlement in the game, there being 3 special Great Deeps, at Carrick A Peaks, Skaven Blight, and Zar Nagrand, which will give you access to some special buildings. So well worth getting those settlements and building the deeps. But yeah, really good systems. Overall, this is one of my favorite campaign reviews. Prior to Thrones of Decay, or even prior to patch 5.1, the Dwarfs were never really one of my favorites. They were the one I was least looking forward to with Thrones of Decay, but they've actually ended up being the one that I've played the most prior to Thrones of Decay, because the Dwarf rework has just been an absolute nail on the head as far as I'm concerned. Right up there with the Beastmen rework. They took a faction that I wasn't really that interested in, and now I play the Dwarfs more than ever. So let's talk about firstly the Age of Reckoning. This is not everyone's favorite mechanic, and I recognize that this is something that is definitely going to appeal to a player like me. I like to be aggressive, I like to pummel my enemies as quickly as possible, and this here gives me an incentive to do so. So how it works is that every faction in the game is assigned a certain number of grudges based on what they've done in the past, what their race has done, what they've also done to other dwarven factions that not necessarily specifically to you. There are some factions that may not have incurred any grudges, usually factions like the Empire that might have not done any trespassers or declared war on any dwarves, but sometimes they do something that will incur some grudges. And it could be from a wide variety of things, from agent actions to trespassing to raiding, and even from owning rightful dwarf settlements. So any settlement that is considered a rightful dwarf settlement will have a key dwarf settlement, and every turn that that faction owns it, their entire race is going to accumulate grudges based on that. It's only going to be a small amount unless they own a lot of them. So it's relative to the severity of the grudge. Same thing with when they win battles against you. Well, against other dwarven factions, because you may not actually end up losing battles. But let's just say they go up against a minor dwarf faction out that way, and they end up killing just a very small army. That's not going to accrue as many grudges as if they wiped out 3 full stacks. So the severity of their actions will impact on the number of grudges. And sometimes that can actually be a really good thing if they've accumulated tons of grudges. So something that will usually end up happening is, regardless of which faction you're playing, is when you eventually have to encounter Queek Headtaker. Queek usually accrues an absolute ton of grudges, and so encountering him, he's usually got like 2, 3, I've even seen him at 4,000 grudges on his head. Being the one to put him down and defeat him can be really beneficial, because it can really push you along the line of Age of Reckoning, but also provide you with a significant progress towards confederating the other Legendary Lords. Confederating Legendary Lords is a not something that everybody plays into, but I think a lot of people like to do so, and doing something other than just make them your friend and then confederate them diplomatically is really good here. So basically, each of these Legendary Lords, not just yourself, it's not a mechanic that only the player plays with, which is another special thing, but basically, as they accumulate grudges, you have to sort of outpace them. For the first confederation that you need to do, you have to get 7,500 more grudges settled than whoever it is you're trying to confederate. So let's just say hypothetically you want to confederate Belegar Ironhammer, but if he's actually successfully smashing up the Skaven and accumulating a lot of settled grudges, and is way ahead of, say, Thorek Ironbrow, well, then he's not going to be able to be confederated if you're not way ahead of him. But Thorek may have been completely wiped out by Malekith or by Valkyr, and he's just not accumulating any further grudges, and so it's pretty easy to outpace someone that is standing still. And then you can just confederate them, even if they've been eliminated, brings the legendary lord back from the dead. You just don't get any of their territory because they don't have any territory left. And for each time you confederate a legendary lord, the price goes up for the next confederation. I think it's a really good system to balance out this sort of late game snowballing that you will get with accumulating more settled grudges, because you'll be going up against more aggressive factions that have just accumulated a lot of grudges over the course of their campaign. Because yeah, if we have a look here at the beginning here with Thorgrim's campaign, this one here having only 81 grudges, that's not that big of a deal, especially since at the beginning of the campaign it's telling us to sort out 2,640. Now that might seem like a ridiculous amount, but the thing is, as you are aggressively pushing through the campaign, they will accumulate more and more, and also legendary lords tend to have a big price on their head, so this minor faction here is no big deal. Same thing is, eventually you end up going up against the Ironclaw Orcs, so they are probably going to smash down on Belegar Ironhammer at some point, which is going to accrue a lot of grudges. So if you end up fighting Grombrindal Ironclaw within the first 15 turns and defeat him, that'll probably just finish off your entire Age of Reckoning straight off the bat. So seeking out powerful legendary lords that are hurting other dwarfs gives you a huge amount of incentive. Outside of just the confederations, you've also got just the passive bonuses for the dwarfs, which actually fixes a lot of the dwarf problems. Previously, the dwarfs were really slow to grow, and now if you are actively participating in the Age of Reckoning, you get plus 50 growth all provinces, which is significantly higher than your base growth, and that actually makes it at like getting like one of these buildings and a bit in each one of your provinces without having to build it. Then of course you've got the public order benefit, which can also provide you with additional growth, because staying in the positive will provide you growth, or just staying out of the negative, you can prevent the negative growth. And you've also got the Grudge Settler mechanic, which is good, really good mechanic. I like it. I just kind of wish I could actually... This is my one tiny little gripe with this system, is that I always like really desire so many Grudge Settler units, and I have to wait 15 turns to just get one additional, and I kind of wish I could spend grudges to purchase one specific one of them. But like I said, tiny little gripe. It's usually like the Gyrocopter Trollhammer torpedoes, which are insanely bloody good. I'm always starved for them. I just want more of them, and I can only get one every 15 turns. But the other factions, the other Dwarfen factions, they can get Grudge Settler units, so sometimes they've got a Grudge Settler unit that I really want, and so there's an incentive for me to confederate them. Even if I don't want their territory, I just want that damn Grudge Settler. So they've added some really distinct units in here that's available to all the dwarfs, even the minor factions, although I think they toned down the amount that the minor factions will recruit Grudge Settlers, which is good if you're not playing against the dwarves, but not so good if you are playing as the dwarves, because yeah, it's good to confederate like an army that's got a whole bunch of really good Grudge Settlers in there. So overall, huge incentives to participate with this, but also a fairly significant penalty if you decide that you don't want to play into it. But luckily they added in kind of a patch at 5.1, allowing you to turn this system here off completely at a price. All you have to do is find one of the key, the unique undercities, or the deeps. So that's at Skavenblight or Karak Apex or Zar Nagrand, which every dwarf faction starts fairly close to one of them, with the exception of Grombrindal, but if anything, he really should be participating in the Age of Reckoning. That being said, you could always confederate someone that's close to Karak Apex, for example, and then get it that way. But yeah, building a certain structure in the deeps down there can allow you to turn this off. Or you could ramp it up, requiring you to actually fulfill more grudges, but obtain further bonuses like getting more access to Grudge Settler units per army. Another neat thing about Thorgrim's army is he starts off with 2 Grudge Settler units, but these 2 Grudge Settler units don't actually count as a Grudge Settler, and you can transfer these 2 Grudge Settlers into other armies and they don't count as a Grudge Settler. So it's a way for you to sort of increase your capacity for them just a little bit, but it's only for these 2 here. But yeah, at the end of the campaign, I think the maximum amount, if you get all the global bonuses that you can to Grudge Settler per army. I think you can get it to 17. That's if you get absolutely everything. I think that's the capacity. And, you know, by that point, you would be supremely powerful. So overall, I love the system, but I think defensive players don't really love it too much just because they don't love to, you know, go out there and just be aggressive. They want to be more defensive, and this is something that definitely benefits aggressive players like me, so that's why I like it. Then talking a bit about the deeps, I think this was a great addition. You build the deeps in any province. It does have a fairly steep price, and it requires high king decrees. You can get more high king decrees through tech tree, through various skill trees like with Thorgrim, and also by developing up your deeps. So building up more of your deeps will allow you to build more deeps. And there's various other things that you can spend the decrees on as well. Overall, I think it's a pretty good system with that. It's kind of similar to Herdstones, I guess, with the Beastmen in terms of decrees, I guess. But yeah, there's various global bonuses that you can provide. So if you upgrade your initial deep building here, you can make it so that it's cheaper to build future ones. And there's some really interesting buildings in the deep that don't necessarily provide you with just like the same sort of building as this one here, but rather providing unique global bonuses or penalties even that will affect your playstyle. So if you're going for a wide empire that's focusing on trade, building the buildings that will increase your global tariff income would be really useful. If you're going for something that's just focusing on taxation, they're increasing your income faction-wide could be really useful. There's ones that will allow you to build up massive, impenetrable defenses with no attrition if you're under siege, but they penalize you if your empire is too big. So there's a lot of different strategic options depending on how you want to play your game. If you want to build tall, or short, or deep, I guess, and you only want to have 5 settlements in your entire campaign, investing into the deeps and making your settlements absolutely impregnable can be a really good way of getting that really like it's the end of the world sort of dwarf feeling. So overall, I absolutely love the dwarf rework, and if you've been sitting on the fence about trying out the dwarfs, all I can say is that I highly recommend them. Just watch out for the fire at will bug that's currently active at the moment. Basically, I got to point this out because so many people are encountering this issue, and the dwarfs are absolutely prone to it just due to having a lot of missile units. If you are going to use missile-heavy armies, try to have 2 armies back to back so that you can deny enemy reinforcements with not control large army. That will, in most cases, prevent the fire at will bug from occurring. Even if you've just got 1 lord hanging behind your main army, I mean, it will increase your supply lines, but it's just a makeshift way of ensuring that bug doesn't factor into it, because it is such a pain in the ass, and there's not much you can do once it's actually active on the battlefield. Now, let's talk about Thorgrim Grudgebearer. He's still got the same start position that he's always had. He's at Karak, still goes up against Bloody Spears, and you're probably still going to be going up against Crooked Moon in the early stages of the campaign. The main difference here is that you are so heavily incentivized with being aggressive here and taking out Crooked Moon as early as possible, because instead of Wurzag, because Wurzag's moved as well, Wurzag is no longer at Ekrund, you're probably going to have to deal with the Ironclaw Orcs very early on, so taking out Skarsnik as quickly as you possibly can is going to be essential before this guy here just drowns you with Orcs. Now, that being said, Orcs are usually pretty crappy fighters, but they will just try to defeat you with numbers, especially if they call a war, which usually does happen, especially in the higher difficulties. So building up your defenses if you feel like you need to is definitely useful, and just getting some really good units very early on, especially Gyrocopters. Gyrocopters are so much, I mean, I know those are Gyro Bombers. Gyrocopters and Gyro Bombers are so much better for the dwarfs than what they used to be. Now, in terms of Thorgrim Grudgebearer's skill tree, I do think it's pretty similar to what it was before, but there are some really beneficial perks to it that affect the rework. So if we go to High King specifically, you've got Age of Reckoning Grudge Settler army size +5. So one thing I didn't mention, if you manage to get to Nollengrom, it spawns a temporary army of Grudge Settlers. Now the base size of that is, I think it's 10 units, but you can eventually make it a full stack. And the only way to do that is if you've actually got Thorgrim Grudgebearer and you get this. Then the other 5 comes in through the tech tree. And then there's things like getting extra High King decrees. So Thorgrim is heavily incentivized to building deep, which eventually the deeps are kind of overpowered. If you build enough deeps, you can actually end up with basically free construction costs globally, free upkeep cost for all of your armies globally, and like ridiculous amounts of money. Like it's insane how powerful the dwarves can actually become now, and just how much they can potentially get for free. But that is way later on in the campaign if you invest into it. You've got to start investing into it fairly early. I know it's quite a hefty price, but it is kind of worth it. Then you've also got on top of that, and this is another thing with the rework I actually forgot to mention, with the legendary grudges. So sorting out these legendary grudges, which there was sort of legendary grudges before, which provide you with some benefits, but I feel like the benefits now are so much better, like restoring the underway network. So not only do they have the underway stance, like tunneling, but with this here, if it's in the tunneling network, it has to be activated first. This allows you to basically teleport an army from here to anywhere else that also has an activated network. So for example, there's one at Uzkolak. I think there's some up this way. I'm actually not entirely sure. There's definitely some over here, and that just allows you to move your armies around, just teleport them really bloody quickly, so you can move them. I mean, there's a cooldown every single time you use it, but if you need to move it in an emergency situation, it's very much similar to the world routes. But it's a really good system because you have to actually complete certain legendary grudges, which has various objectives that need to be sorted out before they can be unlocked. And then there's various other things like being able to call in the mines. That's a really good one because that will affect every single one of your armies and every single one of your garrisons, making it strong. And these guys here, they don't decay, so there's just free summons that you get in every single battle, so that's super good. Getting access to unique landmarks. Just the dwarf rework is just so friggin' cool just because of it gives you so much incentive to just go out there and actually explore the world, or don't. So much incentive to stay put and just be a one settlement faction if you really want as well. Letting you choose whichever way you want to play. Anyway, back to Thorgrim. Just wanted to mention that bit as well. But yeah, his ones over here. It hasn't changed that much since what it was prior to the rework, but I do think these little changes here do make all the difference. Especially with the unbreakable when fighting against enemies that have like over 1,000 grudges and giving you perfect vigor with it as well. So that's heavily incentivizing Thorgrim to seek out the real big grudge doers, wrongdoers or whatever. Things like Squeak Headtaker, Gorbad Ironclaw, Grimgor Ironhide, anyone who's got 1,000 grudges. Thing is though, once you've taken out a legendary lord that has 1,000 grudges, they're not dead, but when they come back, they're not going to have 1,000 grudges. It takes time for them to accumulate it. But anyway, let's now move on to a different legendary lord. Overall, I do think that Thorgrim Grudgebearer's campaign is significantly better than it was before, and I'd probably rate it like an 8 out of 10 now. I give a lot of 8 out of 10s, but that's what I would rate it. Now let's move on to Belegar Ironhammer. So once again, Belegar's start position hasn't changed, but his campaign has changed a lot, just thanks to the dwarf rework. So now you're heavily incentivized even more so to get to Karak 8 Peaks because of the unique Undercity Deeps building that they've got there, but also you've got Skaven Blight over here. So usually what I do in my Belegar Ironhammer campaigns is just go straight for Skaven Blight. That being said, of course, you usually don't have the resources to build that up straight away, but I do like to take out Clan Scryer as quickly as possible. Not only will you get extra research rate from having defeated Ikkerclaw, but also prevent Ikkerclaw from bloody nuking your area later down the track. These greenskins here are not that big of a concern. They usually take quite a while before they actually decide to attack you. But yeah, if you want to take these guys out super early, that's definitely something that is possible, but it is a little bit challenging. Otherwise, taking them out, there's already a fair few grudges over here. It's not necessarily difficult to do, but thing is with Belegar's campaign, same problem that he's always had is the increased upkeep cost plus 50% until Karak 8 Peaks is recaptured. This makes it very difficult for Belegar to justify additional units just because of how expensive they actually are. It's good that you've got these heroes over here, but this is something that is a lot easier for you to deal with when you're on lower difficulties because you're not dealing with as many armies. Belegar is a super strong lord, his heroes are super strong, his army is going to be very strong, but you're not really going to be able to financially justify new armies that are particularly big to deal with all the various threats that come at you. And the fact that you start off with a minor settlement instead of a major settlement means that it's kind of not very defensible, and you don't have many allies in the area. That being said, taking these guys out here will allow you to diplomatically confederate Karak Hirn really early on, but that's a 2-settlement faction, not really that big of a deal, and sometimes delaying their confederation can be quite good as long as nobody else wipes them out, just because it gives them more time to accumulate some grudge settler units, which it'd be good to take them for yourself. So that's why one of the reasons why I usually go after Skaven Blight. Overall, this is, in my opinion, the most challenging of the Dwarf campaign. So if you're looking for a challenging Dwarf campaign, this is definitely the one to go for. But in my opinion, it's not really the most fun, just due to being hamstrung due to this penalty here, which I think is the most severe of anyone that is going after the Karak 8 peak mission. So that being Skarsnik and Queek, where they just suffer a public order penalty, which is not that big of a deal. Plus 50% upkeep cost is quite huge. You know, obviously, the more armies you've got, the worse that's going to be. So with Belegar, there's a lot of incentive to get over to Karak Apex as early as possible and make that go away. And then just play out your Dwarf campaign as normal. Like I said, fairly challenging campaign. I'd probably rate this one like a 6 out of 10 in terms of fun. I think this was really for the more hardcore Dwarf players. I do really enjoy it, but I think overall it's a 6. All right, now let's move on to, what's his name? Ungrim Ironfist. Okay, so Ungrim Ironfist, once again, still at Karak Kadrin. He hasn't moved, which originally he was part of Karaza Karak and didn't have his own faction. But yeah, it's still basically the same thing. It's just how this campaign mechanic affects him, which, in my opinion, affects him massively because everyone around him, with the exception of Thorgrim, is like a villain to the dwarves. So to begin with, you take out these guys here. That's not really a big issue, and then you want to fight Azag the Slaughterer as quickly as possible. So it can be a little bit of a trick start coming down to Fallen King Mountain, because Azag will still be over here by the time that you can potentially take Khazad Irkulaz, especially because they'll probably have an army sitting in there recruiting. It largely depends on your difficulty level and how quickly you get over there. But stopping one of his armies from finishing their recruitment can be really useful because the AI greenskins get uber bloody cheese, especially on the higher difficulties. And so you want to take out Azag as quickly as bloody possible. Even if it means that these guys here end up recapturing Nashrak's lair, they're not that big of a deal, these guys. And once you've beaten them, well, then you meet Skarsnik anyway. And they've got territory all the way down to Grom Peak anyway. And because they're a minor faction, just wouldn't worry about them quite as much. Azag's the one that you should really focus on. So it's a little bit of a trick start. Just get over there and smash him as quickly as possible while he's dealing with these guys. He'll take a couple of turns to deal with that. That's my recommendation for his campaign. Now, the great thing for Ungrim is how much you're rewarded for fighting greenskins. And if you do lose some territory to the greenskins early on, well, that's okay. That's just going to accumulate more grudges for you to settle, and then just go over there and recapture it. And it should be fairly easy. Individually, a dwarf army absolutely smashes individually a greenskin army. The way that the greenskins win is when they call a war on you, and they show up with 4 armies to go and fight your 1. It's still pretty good to just spam slayers with Ungrim. His skill tree is basically the same. Another thing to keep in mind is that with the addition of Thorgrim Ironfist, his son, as you recruit more slayers, you will eventually get him, and putting him into Ungrim's army is actually the optimal thing to do with him because it just boosts the slayers by so much. So Ungrim's slayer-based army is stronger now than ever before. But that is, of course, attached to the DLC, so you need the DLC if you want to actually get access to it. So that's Malachi's DLC. But yeah, overall, I think this is a pretty good campaign. You don't have any sort of crippling campaign mechanics that's slowing you down. Slayers are actually really quite cost-effective now. You'll have access to them straight away with the Slayer building. And you've also got access to Slayer Pirates. Although, personally, I just like to go with regular Slayers. Just get close into them in melee, because you've also got access to Journey's End, which can be upgraded to what their original purpose was before they got nerfed. So if you go over to here, this will give you the extra to 50% before they actually start taking casualties. So Ungrim got super strong at one point, then he got nerfed, and then he got buffed back to where he was again. But he gets that buff later on in his campaign. But yeah, take out Azag as quickly as possible because they just don't ever stop recruiting, and your recruitment is going to be based on your money. They're just going to have more than you just due to cheats. So the situation here is not as challenging as Belegar's campaign unless you are very passive. You need to be very aggressive if you want to play as Karak Kadrin. You've got all the tools that you need to go and do that. Just get some Slayers, get in over there, and get rid of Azag as quickly as possible. You might lose some ground here and there, but you also got to consider that you've got vampires over here as well. You are quite badly surrounded by enemies on all sides. You've got more vampires over here. Getting allied to Thorgrim, or even confederating him early on, can be very useful. But at least with Ungrim Ironfist, he's in a really good position to accumulate grudges settled very quickly, so it shouldn't be any problem for you to sort out your Age of Reckonings every 15 turns, which is really good because you'll get the benefits that'll boost your entire faction so that you can just continue going on fighting, which is basically how things exist in the Warhammer War. Just got to keep on fighting. Overall, I think this is a pretty good campaign. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. I don't think it's the most interesting one just because it's a bit one-dimensional. All you do is just spam Slayers, basically, and that's just Ungrim's thing to do, which you could always just confederate Ungrim and still spam Slayers. Obviously, his Slayers will be a little bit better due to the speed, and they'll also be a bit cheaper to recruit, but I don't consider this particular faction effect here to be very impactful. It would have been really great if, with the Dwarf rework, Ungrim could have received some sort of actual Slayer mechanic, but it's still a good campaign. 7 out of 10 is not bad. I just think the other ones are a little bit better, except for Belegar's, obviously. Anyway, that's the end of Ungrim's one. Let's now move on to Grombrindal. Let's see. Okay, so Grombrindal's start position hasn't changed since the rework. He got removed from Thorgrim's faction a while ago, basically I think it was like the beginning of Immortal Empires, and he's all the way in Nagaroth. You're pitted up against Malekith very early on, which is one of the legendary grudges basically to sort out the Dark Elves, so it gives you an opportunity to sort that legendary grudge out fairly early. It does leave you to be the most isolated out of all of the dwarfs, except for maybe Malachi, depending on how you look at it. But due to how the confederations work, even if you haven't met these other legendary lords, you can still confederate them, and you can also use the his quest battles to teleport to them in order to meet them if you want to confederate them diplomatically. That being said, everyone in this area here is pretty much a villain, so you're going to accumulate a lot of settled grudges very early on. He does have kind of his own campaign mechanic. It's pretty passive, the Living Ancestor, giving you a dilemma about what focus you want to put on Grombrindal's faction or Grombrindal's army. Not that big of a deal in terms of other main like DLC campaign mechanics like what Malachi has, for example, but it is better than nothing, and it is just straight up buffs as opposed to Belegar's, which is just straight up debuffs. So this campaign here, you don't have to wipe out Malekith. You could decide to be friendly with him. That is a possibility. Because he doesn't start off at war with you, and he doesn't start off with terrible relations. So you can build a bridge instead of burning it down with him if you really want to. But you are more incentivized to take him out. However, somebody that you are definitely not going to be able to negotiate with, not without a lot more effort, is actually your true threat in the area, which is actually Valkyr the Bloody. So what I find is actually more useful is not necessarily allying with Malekith, but giving him a settlement early on and asking him to join war with Valkyr. So you'd have to already be at war with Valkyr in order to do that, because you don't want to sign a military alliance with him, because as soon as you declare war on him, he'll just break it because he's a backstabbing bitch. But yeah, go to war with Valkyr, sell a settlement to Malekith, get him to, in exchange for him going to war with Valkyr, because he's closer to her, and then that will give you some time to take out her vassal and come out over this way. Most of this area here is no longer considered Chaos Waste, which originally it was, so it's actually green territory for the most part. You just got to get rid of that corn corruption. And then once you've taken out Valkyr, that's when I would recommend putting the smackdown on Malekith there. And then, of course, once you start fighting Malekith, then you got to go for Helebron. There's just Dark Elves all over the place over this way. But you'll at least sort out the Age of Reckoning really quite quickly. Now, Another thing I forgot to mention with the Age of Reckoning, and this is something that is going to be very prevalent for Grombrindal's campaign if you confederate the other legendary lords in a fairly quick succession, in that the amount of grudges that you need to settle is based on the enemies that border you. So one thing that you can do in order to make it so that you don't have to settle very many grudges is actually make it so that you are surrounded by people that don't have any grudges to be settled. Even if in the wider scheme of things there are huge enemies with huge amounts of grudges that have been accumulated. Now with Grombrindal, because when you eventually confederate the other legendary lords you'll have a fragmented empire, this will extend your borders massively, requiring more armies to defend them, but also it will massively increase the amount of grudges that you need to settle. So it can be a word of warning, a word of caution. Be careful about doing a confederation right before the end of a Age of Reckoning, because you might end up finding it being 3, 4, or even 10 times higher than your previous one, because the other faction that you just confederated with is completely surrounded by, say, Ikeclaw as an example. So it's best to confederate a legendary lord right after an Age of Reckoning is finished, like on the first couple of turns. That way you've got time to sort the shit out before this goes up, because whatever amount that you're assigned with at the very beginning of the Age of Reckoning, that's the amount that you have to deal with for the 15 turns. You don't have to worry about it until the next one. And so getting a confederation can actually allow you to do an Age of Reckoning really quickly, depending on how you time it. So this is something to note there. But yeah, this is a pretty good campaign. I really enjoyed this one. I'd also give this one here an 8 out of 10, maybe even 8.5 out of 10, just because no other dwarf starts off in such a weird location, I guess now, except for Malachi McCase, and he starts off in a similar sort of situation, dealing with, because he's got Malice Darkblade near him, as well as loads and loads of Chaos Forces. But yeah, overall, I really do enjoy this campaign here. Grombrindal's skill tree hasn't really changed that much. He does boost a hell of a lot of units, and he's just got some really good global bonuses down here. So he's a super good legendary lord. And since you're nestled right in the sort of corner of the map in this area here, this can actually be a very good defensive position. So it's not so bad that you start off with a minor settlement here, because usually you get a bit of warning before they start coming around this way. There's also a very good landmark here, which will provide you with control +2 faction-wide and some Oath Gold. All of that stuff is very handy. So overall, I'd give this one an 8.5 out of 10 in terms of how much fun I think it is. Overall challenge is probably similar to Thorgrim Grudgebearer, just because you're not surrounded in this campaign. You just keep going one enemy at a time until, of course, you snowball out of control. Anyway, let's now move on to Thorek Ironbrow. So once again, Thorek's start position hasn't changed since the rework, or really since he was introduced into the game in Warhammer 2. He starts off at Karak Zorn, and you start off punching onto these Arachnos greenskins. Super easy to deal with. It's basically very linear. This is not a trick start. Just pummel them as quickly as you can, and continue to recruit as you go. And then pretty much everyone in the area here is not really that challenging for Thorek. Thorek is just super bloody powerful. It's actually a massive problem for Khalida. So taking out Khalida is so easy. So that's not a problem whatsoever. But you do have to worry a little bit about Skarbrand, because Skarbrand is significantly buffed up than he was before, this in terms of the AI, so he can be a bit more aggressive and have more forces coming at you. There are quite a lot of enemies in the area, but you do start reasonably close to Karak 8 Peaks, and then of course you've got your sort of like he's not a DLC character, he's an FLC character. He's got his main mechanic, which is to go around and retrieve these artifacts, and each artifact has like a pair. Once you've completed the pair, you get a pretty significant bonus to it, giving him an edge over some of the other dwarven factions that just don't have anything like this whatsoever. You know, and these bonuses range from having a regiment of renowned Carnosaur to having some items and various abilities that you can use in battle. Overall, pretty good mechanic, incentivizing you to take out specific settlements where these relics belong, and it tells you exactly where they are with the little circle around these settlements. Once you've captured it, it's yours. And then it's a pretty straightforward campaign. I don't think it's anything too difficult. Thorek is extremely powerful, and he starts off with a very strong army. Having Iron Breakers to begin with is especially good against greenskins in the early game because for one thing, their missile units suck, so they're just going to block all the shots anyway, and their high melee defense means that anything that has reasonable amount of weapon strength usually doesn't have that much melee attack. They're just going to block everything, and of course Thorek has got really good quarrelers. The only thing you really need to watch out for, once again, is of course the fire at will bug. If you're going to spam loads and loads of quarrelers, just make sure that you don't end up in battles that are too big, or else they just won't end up shooting. But yeah, with Thorek, he's more prioritized using non-gunpowder units and more of the classic, I guess, the older style of weapons, so crossbows and grudge throwers, and also the bolt throwers. They can be very good under him. Overall, I'd actually give this campaign a 9 out of 10 because it's an interesting start position due to the enemies that are around you. It's also not particularly challenging, but it gives you a lot of incentive to go out and do capture various settlements and get various bonuses, which are pretty interesting, unique to him as well, including an additional ancestor hero that he can get. Another thing that you can do is get a mission fairly early on to confederate Karak Azul. So the problem with doing that, though, is that these guys can get eliminated very early on, depending on what Gorbad Ironclaw decides to go, whether he decides to go this way or that way. And confederating them usually means that you end up with some settlements that end up getting basically hounded by either greenskins or Skaven, so you usually just want to sell those settlements straight away. But getting Cazador Dragonslayer, at least he's got like a semi-unique trait, making him like a semi-legendary lord, but that's something that you can get fairly early on. In terms of settling grudges, there's plenty in the area to sort out, so you're not going to be short on that, as long as you're aggressive. Overall, I think it's a good campaign. Like I said, 9 out of 10 for this one. I think it's really good. In terms of Malakai's campaign, I don't think I rated it and gave it a ranking out of 10. I'd give that one 10 out of 10. I love Malakai's campaign, but I don't need to do a separate section in this video for him. Anyway, that's the end of this one here in terms of the overall Dwarf reviews updated. Hopefully that is significantly more information than what I provided last time, and we'll keep it up to date for a long time. I don't expect the Dwarfs to get any more Legendary Lords or any more reworks. They're in a really good position now, and there's other factions that desperately need it a lot more, such as the Vampire Counts and Bretonnia. Whether or not Bretonnia is actually going to get their promised rework, I don't know. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Let me know in the comments below which race you would like me to focus on next with the campaign review, or even if you think that's enough for now, because a lot of the other races haven't gone through a huge amount of change, and a DLC is due reasonably soon, and that might change a few things going forward. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.